My name is Kelly, and I'm the pastor here at Edges, but I don't come because I'm the pastor. I come because I believe that song, because Jesus really is breaking my own chains, giving me freedom that comes only in Jesus, and I see Jesus doing that for you as well. Only it doesn't feel like an army rising up to me. To me, it feels like a party is rising up, and I just want to be part of it. So thanks for joining me here this morning, for letting me participate in your parties and sharing with you mine. This year we've resolved to practice holding on to what is good together in this church. We are asking whether it's true that God really wants to and whether God can bring about good anywhere, anytime, from anything. And well, that will require some experimentation, won't it? It'll require more than a little bit of courage, and it will require a kind of trust that most of us will have to grow into. So, full steam ahead. For this series, we'll sit down with what may just be one of the most good vacant arenas of late, an area that I could aptly summarize as the news. How many times lately have you read or heard or watched the news after which you've thought to yourself, wow, that was good. I mean, that was really, really good. How often after encountering the day's news have you found yourself in a super good spot? Something like hopeful or inspired, ready to get involved or excited to participate. Let me be clear. This series is not about finding alternative Hallmark news stories buried beneath all the confusing, depressing, even maddening news. This series is about mining for good, right in the middle of the existing story plot, whatever that plot is. And that's a different endeavor. It's about wondering whether God and people can make any good difference when we engage whatever is already really happening in the world. It's about growing in trust because we're actually being shaped by the gospel. What's the gospel? Good news, right? Gospel is a Bible word for the good news that Jesus claimed would help us really live. So, in short, what different something might happen if we didn't shut down or turn off or give up after the news, and instead engaged some of the stories that are already in motion? What if we believed that we could find and participate with God for good in them? Okay, well, let's start with what's trending in the news lately. Just call out a few topics. We can do this. What are some things that are trending in the news lately? Go ahead, call them out. North Korea. The number one answer, by the way, in the first service. Puerto Rico. Healthcare. The weather. Trump in general. Fake news. Immigration. Racism. Wow, the Rohingya refugees. Royhinga, right? Yeah, refugees. The Las Vegas shooting. Sorry? Hate. The World Series. Anything else? Okay. Now, what do you feel when you try to sit down inside most of these topics? Go ahead. Call some things out. Fear. Did you say anger? Anger. Disgust. Discouraged. Scared. Completely frustrated. Helpless. Conflicted. And hopeful. Defensive. Busy. Like there isn't anything I can do to help. All right. For most of these feeling places, from the places of fear and anger and disgust and discouragement, from being completely frustrated or helpless, conflicted, defensive, busy, from the place like there's nothing we can do, and even from a place where we are hopeful. It can still be pretty hard to see what is good, much less hold on to it. So I wonder, would it make any difference if we engaged some of these topics? Would it make any difference if we engaged racism or refugee crises or health care or immigration? Would it make any difference in any of those topics if we engage them like case studies for how to practice the gospel? Would it make any difference if we tried to see where God is always moving and maybe wanting us to move too in relation to some of this actual news? And finally, would it make any difference if we tried to grasp for good together as a church? Would that be different than the kind of effort that we try to make or not make all by ourselves inside our own private spaces? Well, late this summer, feeling dilapidated and sort of helpless, feeling many of the words you all said with regard to the overwhelming stories that are in the world, but believing these are exactly the plot lines God promises to underwrite with hope. Why? Because God goes where people need hope. Our planning team dreamt this series. And about a month ago, in an act of sort of holy defiance, we named the series Good News. Honestly, it was sort of a way to make ourselves commit to finding the courage to engage the gospel according to Jesus up next to the stories that are real. So each week for the next 4 weeks, we're going to explore a different topic that's making some news, that's trending, if you will. Some news that seems pretty overwhelming or confusing or hopeless. And before each Sunday, we'll let you know the topic by email and on social media for 2 reasons. One, you may want to invite some folks for whom the topic may be especially relevant. And 2, a particular topic might be close to your own insides, and either you need to know it's coming, or maybe you need to make sure you come because you need some other folks to help you cling to what is good from a place that doesn't feel so much so. Well, this past Thursday, like 3 days ago, when it was far too late to start writing a sermon, right on time with the topic I'd already been working on, the president declared the opioid crisis in our country to be a public health emergency. Were most of you aware? Right. That's news, trending pretty big. So that's news. So to make sure we're on the same page, first of all, what's an opioid? And second of all, why is it the source of an emergency health crisis? The term opioid, as some of you may know, refers to a class of drugs that act on these things called opioid receptors that are found mostly inside the human brain. And when that happens, it produces morphine-like effects for people. So opioids are the substances that we may recognize on a spectrum from prescription painkillers like hydrocodone or Oxycontin to substances like heroin and the newest, even more dangerous synthetic form called fentanyl. So opioids, like other drugs, are a crisis. And here's why. Because they help quickly reduce pain and increase pleasure. They help quickly reduce pain and or increase pleasure, and they do it in ways that kill people. So you see why we need the crisis, right? Because many people are high on pain and low on pleasure. There's an easy marriage. Now, the substance abuse crisis in this country, it's escalated by this rapid increase in opioid use. But the crisis isn't limited to opioids, so I want to take a bit of a departure here to a broader subject. It's just that opioids happen to be the boutique news of the day for many reasons that we don't have time to discuss this morning. Nonetheless, they help shine a light on the crisis, but the crisis is about any and all substance use that may lead to death, and that number is skyrocketing. So, a few statistics. According to the Center for Disease Control's National Center for Health Sciences, I'd like to offer you a few observations. In America, this is just our country. In 2016, drug overdoses were the leading cause of death for Americans under the age of 50. The leading cause of death. More than car accidents and gun homicides combined. Since 1990, the number of Americans who have died every year from drug overdoses has increased by 650%. The trajectory is in the wrong direction. That's what that statistic tells us. And researchers who have preliminary data for 2017 say that rate of increase is comparable to the height of the HIV epidemic. So for a visual of what that increase looks like between the years 1999 and the year 2015, take a look at this. So in the upper left-hand corner, you see 1999, when there were 17,000 drug overdose deaths. And then as you move your way down that chart and the red and orange increase, we get to the year 2016, where there were over 64,000 drug overdose deaths. So if we enlarge that last map, the map on the bottom right from the year 2015, you can take a closer look at Virginia. Not to state the obvious, but we live in the red and dark orange side of the state. We live where the crisis is at its height, right here in Blacksburg, in our church, in our neighborhoods, in our schools. Let's talk for a minute about Virginia. In 2015 in Virginia, those colored areas represent 1,005 drug overdose deaths. So of that total number, 1,005 of them in 2015 were in Virginia. Fast forward 1 year to 2016, we don't have that map because the CDC doesn't have conclusive results by county yet. But the colors would conservatively show more than 1,387 drug overdose deaths. The important thing to think about with that is that represents an increase of over 38% in Virginia in 1 year. I did not pull West Virginia stats, but you could, and maybe you should, yeah. If we further zoom into home to the New River Valley, according to the 2015 data published by our own New River Valley Community Services. More than 16,000 folks in our backyard in the New River Valley have substance use disorders. Among them, 34 folks in the New River Valley in this past year overdosed on opioids. And according to the Youth Risk Behavior Survey done by New River County Community Services, 11.4% of high school students in the New River Valley had misused prescription drugs within the last 30 days to get high. If that statistic isn't shocking enough, perhaps you would like to know that the national average is 3.2. So this is one time when the evidence supports the president's announcement that there is a national health crisis. There's a state health crisis, and we have a local health crisis. Announcing a national public health emergency is supposed to help move the needle on the statistics related to addiction and death through things like intervention and education and support and programming. That's what the announcement is supposed to do. And if you've been paying attention this week in the wake of that announcement, now you can see that everybody's fighting about which initiatives, who will champion them, where the money will come from, and what exactly it will accomplish. And to be sure, all of these are very, very important questions to answer as parts of the solution. Meanwhile, though, back to those feelings after the news. What's there to do? To restate a question one of you asked earlier, what in the world can we do? First, substance use disorder might be a better word for saying what we really mean when we're talking about these particular addictions. So that we're all on the same page here, let me suggest that addictions are persisting in behaviors despite negative consequences. So now to restate the earlier question. Would it make any difference if we held our beliefs about what to do about the substances, and especially our opinions of people who struggle with substance use disorder, close to the gospel? Would it make any difference if we tried to see where God is always moving when this is the story? Would it help us to see more clearly where Jesus may be pushing us to move to, even through our own discomfort? Discomfort feels often like thinking we don't want it to be us. I'd like for you to hear a story from Mark's Gospel to see if we can find good in the news according to Jesus. From Mark chapter 5.
Hear the word of God. Jesus and his disciples came to the other side of the lake, to the region of the Gerasenes. As soon as Jesus got out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came out of the tombs. This man lived among the tombs, and no one was ever strong enough to restrain him, even with a chain. He had been secured many times with leg irons and chains, but he broke the chains and smashed the leg irons. No one was tough enough to control him. Night and day in the tombs and the hills, he would howl and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from far away, he ran and knelt before him, shouting, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Swear to God that you won't torture me." He said this because Jesus had already commanded him, "Unclean spirit, come out of the man." Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He responded, "Legion is my name, because we are many." They pleaded with Jesus not to send them out of that region. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the hillside. "Send us into the pigs," they begged. "Let us go into the pigs." Jesus gave them permission, so the unclean spirits left the man and went into the pigs. Then the herd of about 2,000 pigs rushed down the cliff into the lake and drowned. Those who tended the pigs ran away and told the story in the cities and in the countryside. People came to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the man who used to be demon-possessed. They saw the very man who had been filled with many demons sitting there, fully dressed and completely sane, and they were filled with awe. Those who had actually seen what had happened to the demon-possessed man told the others about the pigs. Then they pleaded with Jesus to leave their region. While he was climbing into the boat, the one who had been demon-possessed pleaded with Jesus to let him come along as one of his disciples. But Jesus wouldn't allow it. "Go home to your own people," Jesus said, "and tell them what the Lord has done for you and how he has shown you mercy." The man went away and began to proclaim in the 10 cities all that Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed.
As we understand that gospel text, there was a man who lived in complete social isolation and in self-destruction and in the realm of death. Nobody, the text says, had been strong enough to help him or to stop him or to control him. 24 hours out of every 24 hours, the man exists without joy and with unrelenting pain. His story shares the plot of many with substance use disorders. Despite negative consequences, his behavior continues. If it ever was, it is no longer a choice. He's got many demons now, and because of this, every interaction amounts to him to be an interaction of torture, either to himself or to others, most often both. And then one unusual day, he sees Jesus, who he believes is the Son of the Most High God. And yet, he knows Jesus will just torture him too. How does a guy get to the place where that's what he thinks when he sees the Most High God? Jesus sees the mess of a man. And Jesus knows that this man too is a child of the Most High God. And on that fact alone, Jesus gets involved. What does Jesus see that we often can't? What does Jesus remember that we may have forgotten? Why does Jesus get involved? For starters, Jesus must know that like 70% of folks with addictions, this man has likely experienced some precipitating trauma. It's not just about the demons. Jesus must remember that this man may be in the 50% of people with substance abuse that have some co-occurring mental illness. Jesus must see beneath the behaviors. Jesus must see down underneath the demons. Jesus must see behind the addictions to the troubled life that made a likely home for them. Jesus must know that what really moves the needle on a public health crisis like this guy is to really believe, as my wise friend Anne says, that the problem is not only with the seeds or the demons, it's with the soil, the person. Jesus must remember the data on the matter, that seeds don't often sprout unless they have dark, damp, anguished soil to grow in. One quick aside. Substances don't themselves cause addiction. If they did, everyone who used a substance would develop an addiction. Most people with substance use disorder have experienced trauma, and half of them have mental illnesses, and somehow that makes for anguished soil, and it's more fertile. A really important thing to know when wondering to what extent people need to seek pleasure and avoid pain. So Jesus asked the man his name. He sidles up to his life. He digs the demons out, but his focus is on the sickness in the soil. So he stays with the man until the Bible says the man is fully dressed and completely sane. I would like to be that just once. Either, actually, fully dressed or completely sane. This man, who was previously a raging and self-ravaging outcast, now sits there on the rock in peace. If that isn't an image of humanity regained, I don't know what is. When the man is healed, he progresses from the non-human life of a rabid animal to that of a person with a home and with friends. And so Jesus sends him back there to his community. But the guy doesn't return home to take up life as usual. No, his healing has given him a new mission. It's given him new purpose to let others know that God's healing power can overcome the worst evils in human experience. Now, do we believe the story or don't we? Is it the gospel or not? And if it is, will we get involved? So today, I just want to suggest that there is something the church can uniquely do. There are lots of good ways to focus on the seeds. Organizations, governments, big systems can focus on the seeds, and the church should jump in as well. But what the church can uniquely do, along with Jesus, is to focus on the soil. To have courage, to ask people their names, to sit with them until they get their dignity back. Sure, it will help to stop producing seeds. It will help to educate people that the seeds may be fatal. It will help to eradicate the seeds wherever they're rampant. But who will have the courage for the long, slow tilling that returns healthy soil? Who will remember what Jesus has clearly not forgotten? That pain and pleasure find their right ratios in healthy community, not through substances. That the final sustainable correction for addiction is connection. Who will listen to the news story about the public health crisis? Who will hear those statistics but see children of the Most High God? And who will have the courage to sit down on the rocks with people until they become fully clothed and in their right minds? Completely sane, fully at peace. Church, is anybody standing in line for this role? Sure. As individuals, we want and should bolt from this. It's a role too big for any one human. Frankly, it's a role too big for any group of people without God. But how could we stand together with Jesus on this one? So I asked and met with several folks this week who have been sitting on the rocks. And I asked, what would it look like for us to sit on the rocks with people? I spoke with a substance abuse counselor here in town. I spoke with a professional at Lewis Gale Hospital. I spoke with a counselor in our community. And I spoke with 2 friends with substance use disorders. The recommendations that I bring to you this morning are not my own. They're not research. They're anecdotal. They're not conclusive. They are possible ways to begin. What could we do? First, we could remove words like alcoholic and addict from our vocabulary. The man in the story is not a demoniac. He's a man who has a few demons. Just doing that would help restore some identity. Second, we could become informed. We could read. And while we were reading, we would be shutting up, and that would be good. But if we would become informed, then we would learn to say nothing about addiction that we can't support with data. And we would learn to demand data from others before they say things. And we would insist on sources. And then we would become less apt to accept hype and stereotypes. If you don't know what to read, I would love to share some of the mounds of things I've been reading with you. Just text me or email me and I'll shoot you some of the things. You can find them easily on your own because remember, this past Thursday we declared there is a national public health crisis. So guess what? There is lots to read. We could make friends. We could resolve that we will be people who will be with people who are struggling with other people. We could form group friendships and we could engage in mutual support. We could recognize that people who struggle with substance use disorder have much to offer. When we are people in this room with substance use disorder, we could trust the church to form a friendship. And in that friendship, we would find creative ways to bear unreasonable pain together. We would find ways for healthy pleasure. This would widen the family circle. And this would help families who have been in it for so many years and who need some help, who have long ago lost hope too, because addiction is not an individual problem, it's a family problem. And we could widen the family circle by doing things that some close-up biological families can no longer do, at least not by themselves. We, this church, could consider becoming one link in a system that helps someone regain some purpose. By that I mean, we could hire someone with substance use disorder who has an intact support system. So we would never do this on our own, right? But when we have someone who has all of the right support structures in place, who's a part of the legal system, who's a part of an advocacy system, who's connected to New River Valley Community Services, who has counselors, who has people who are holding that person in good care, we could become the one link that some people don't have because they have histories. We can't all do that, but perhaps one of us could. Who else is going to? Here's an idea. We could abstain for a month from any substance that we're uncertain about our relationship to. And we could record any reflections that we have. What would that help? It would help solidarity, right? It would help us to understand. We could watch for and then participate in community conversations, but we would do that with the perspective of focusing on the soil. So while the conversation in the community may be about the seeds, we'd show up as a representative for the soil. I have one of those conversations tomorrow at 1 o'clock. I would appreciate it if you'd pray. I don't know what in the world I am doing. But Jesus got involved. Couple things to don't do. Don't force intervention. That's between people and God. Don't embarrass or humiliate anyone, especially in public. Offer people dignity. Don't give money. Go with a person in need to buy what they need, because that helps with dignity and with partnership and in friendship. Don't tell anyone what they need to do. Ask people what help they need, and then decide what you can do in equal partnership with whatever they say. Recently, I was with a friend who struggles with substance use disorder. And I said, "What do you think you need?" And he said, "A good meal." And I said, "Okay, how would we get that?" And he said, "We should go to Ryan's." This is not my idea of a good meal. So we went to Ryan's, where we ate everything behind the splash guard for a couple of hours. And I realized it was exactly what we needed. We were both without isolation for a couple of hours, eating good things slowly. He knew exactly what he needed to get through the next 2 hours. I have another friend who's friend with someone who has a substance use disorder. Both happen to be in Edges, and regularly they walk the Huckleberry Trail just for about 30 minutes, maybe just once or twice a week. But it's 30 minutes in that 24 hours that neither of them is alone. Don't tell people what they need to do. And don't lose hope, church. It is all we have got. Don't lose hope. Why? Because substances are not the best partners for pain or for pleasure. And somebody has to believe there is a real, viable alternative. If we believe the gospel story, if we believe God can bring about good anytime, anywhere, from anything, we have to be God's partners in that hope. Amen.